The sky outside the window was a flat, oppressive gray, the kind that feels like it's slowly sinking. I sat on the edge of the sofa in the living room, the ashtray on the coffee table already overflowing. In the dead quiet of our apartment, the only sound was the tick-tock of the second hand on the wall clock, each click an accusation. I've been sitting like that for 2 hours. My phone screen lit up, a text from Jessica. Project dinner's running late. Go ahead and eat, don't wait up. The words were brief, efficient, not even smiley face. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before letting it go dark. No reply. I stubbed out my cigarette and pushed myself to my feet, walking over to the dining table. Four dishes sat there, all of her favorites, now cold and completely unappetizing, a skin of congealed grease forming on the sauces. Today was our 5th wedding anniversary. She'd forgotten again, or maybe she hadn't forgotten, just decided it wasn't important enough to change her plans for her. A humorless smile touched my lips. I grabbed a plate, served myself some of the cold food, and began to eat in silence. It tasted like nothing, but I chewed each mouthful with methodical precision. Halfway through, the familiar dull ache started in my gut. I winced, putting down my fork. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water and swallowed the pills from the orange prescription bottle in the medicine cabinet. The relief wouldn't be instant. The discomfort coiled inside me. I leaned against the quartz countertop, looking around the sleek, immaculate kitchen. It looked like it belonged in a magazine, a place where no one ever actually cooked. Jessica was always busy with work, and I was constantly out at client dinners. We rarely used the stove. My phone buzzed again. A text from David, my assistant, reminding me about the 9 a.m. board meeting tomorrow. I typed back 2 words. Got it. You sound a little hoarse, Mike. His reply came instantly. Is your stomach acting up again? I can try to reschedule the meeting. David was sharp, always picking up on the smallest things. Don't, I texted back, cutting him off. It's fine. I put the phone down and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights were on, painting the darkness with a cold, electric glow. Down below, an Uber pulled up to the curb. A young woman in a stylish dress hopped out, laughing as she ran into the arms of her boyfriend, who was waiting for her. They kissed, then walked into our building hand in hand. I watched them, my expression unchanged. It felt like a lifetime since Jessica and I had been like that. In the first year of our marriage, she'd call me from the office, asking me to pick her up. She'd loop her arm through mine and chatter all the way home about office gossip and funny emails. When did that stop? I guess it was around the time I threw everything I had into expanding the company, and she started making a real name for herself in her own field. We were both busy, so busy that some days we barely spoke at all. I told myself this was just what marriage became, the unspoken understanding between 2 adults focused on their careers. It wasn't until recently that I started to suspect I was wrong. The pain in my stomach eased into a dull throb. I went back to the living room and began clearing the table. I scraped the untouched food into the trash can and loaded the plates into the dishwasher, my movements practiced, almost robotic. When everything was clean, I went into my study, opened my laptop, and started answering emails. Work had always been my refuge, the easiest way to occupy my hands and my mind. The front door clicked open just after 11. The sound of keys hitting the small tray on the console table, followed by the sharp tap of heels on the hardwood floor. Jessica was home. She was still in her work clothes, a tailored suit that made her look sharp and confident. Her makeup was perfect, though I could see the fatigue around her eyes. But there was a brightness there, too, a lingering excitement from her party. Still up? She asked, seeing the light from under my door as she slipped off her shoes. Yeah, just finishing something up, I called back, my voice flat. She dropped her purse on a chair and came to lean against the doorframe of the study. I told you not to wait up. We landed the Henderson account tonight. Everyone was ecstatic, so we went out for a drink to celebrate. Her tone was light, relaxed, the casual air of a mission accomplished. My eyes never left the screen. I know. There's water on the counter. You should have some. Oh, okay. She didn't move. I could feel her watching my silhouette, the desk lamp casting half my face in shadow. Did you eat? I ate. The conversation stalled. She straightened up. Well, I'm going to take a shower. Okay. She turned to leave, but paused in the middle of the living room. I heard her sniff the air. Did you smoke in here? One, I replied from the study. She frowned. I knew, but didn't say anything more. She hated the smell of smoke, which is why I rarely did it in the apartment. She probably figured I was just stressed from work. She didn't press it. She walked into the bathroom. The water started running. Only then did I lift my head, my gaze fixed on the empty doorway. My expression was unreadable, a storm of emotions churning just beneath the surface. I'd heard the energy in her voice, and it wasn't just about closing a deal. It was something more, a kind of relief. Maybe. I looked back at my laptop, my fingers resting on the keyboard, but I couldn't form a single sentence. My stomach started to hurt again. In the bathroom, Jessica let the hot water cascade over her. She closed her eyes, but another man's face immediately appeared in her mind. Lucas, the new partner of the firm. Young, handsome, full of an energy that was almost overwhelming. The way he looked at her was a direct, unapologetic mix of admiration and heat. At the party tonight, as people were leaving, he caught her by the arm. Jessica, he'd said, his voice low and serious. Do you have any idea how brilliant you are? It's impossible to look away. Her heart had skipped a beat. She'd pulled her hand back instinctively. Thinking about it now, she felt a flush creep up her neck. She shook her head, trying to banish the image. She was a married woman. She couldn't think about things like that. And yet, the feeling, that thrill of being truly seen, something she hadn't felt in a long, long time, was undeniably real. When she came out of the bathroom, the study door was closed. He must have gone to bed. She felt a small, strange sense of relief. For some reason, she didn't know how to face him tonight. She went to the kitchen for a glass of water and found the pitcher was full, the water perfectly cool, but not cold, just the way she liked it. She paused, holding the glass. Michael was always like this, quietly taking care of the little things. But sometimes that same silence felt like a wall, locking her out. She drank a few sips, set the glass down, and walked to the bedroom. Only a dim bedside lamp was on. Michael was already in bed, his back to her side. He seemed to be asleep. She slipped under the covers as quietly as she could. A careful distance separated them, an invisible line drawn down the middle of the mattress. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, wide awake. The man beside her was breathing evenly, but she knew he wasn't asleep. After all these years, she knew his tells. When he was pretending to sleep, his posture was always too perfect, too still. She opened her mouth, wanting to ask if something was wrong, or maybe even to mention what day it was. But in the end, she said nothing. It didn't matter. He probably didn't care anyway. It was just a date on the calendar. She rolled over, turning her back to him, and closed her eyes. In the darkness, Michael slowly opened his. His eyes were clear, devoid of any trace of sleep. He listened to her steady breathing, knowing it was as fake as his own. He thought of the picture he'd seen that afternoon. One of Jessica's colleagues had posted a group photo from a work retreat on Instagram. In the corner of the shot, Jessica was standing very close to a young man, both of them smiling. The man's gaze was fixed on her, intense and proprietary. He'd only glanced at it at the time, scrolling past without a word. Now, the image was burned into his mind. The dull pain in his stomach was a constant presence, a slow, corrosive burn. He sat up, his movements fluid and silent, careful not to disturb her. In the faint city light filtering through the blinds, he studied the profile of her face. It was so familiar, yet tonight, it felt like looking at a stranger. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, until the pre-dawn chill began to seep through his pajamas. Then, without a sound, he stood up and left the room. The next morning, when Jessica woke up, the space beside her was empty. She reached a hand over. The sheets were cold. She rubbed her temples, which were throbbing from a restless night. She got out of bed. The apartment was unnervingly quiet. There was no breakfast on the table, no sign of Michael in the kitchen. This was unusual, unless he had an incredibly early flight or some kind of emergency. He always waited for her to get up, or at least left coffee and toast out for her. She walked to his study. The door was open, the room empty. His desk was neat, his laptop closed. A strange feeling of emptiness washed over her. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over his contact, but she hesitated. He probably just had an emergency at the office. That had to be it. Instead of calling, she sent a text. "Everything okay? You left early." The message went out into the void. Hours passed with no reply. Jessica poured herself a glass of milk, toasted a piece of bread, and called it breakfast. As she was getting ready to leave, she noticed that the spare key to his car, the one he always took when he left early, was gone from the hook by the door. He was definitely out. All day at work, she was distracted. She kept checking her phone, but there was nothing for Michael. It was completely out of character. No matter how busy he was, he always replied, even if it was just a single letter came. In the afternoon, she tried again. Are you coming home for dinner? Still nothing. Just before 5, Lucas appeared at her cubicle. He tapped gently on the partition. Got plans tonight? I know this new Italian place that's supposed to be amazing. Jessica looked up into his smiling eyes. Her first instinct was to say no, but the words that came out were, sure, why not? Maybe it was Michael's silence that was getting to her. Maybe she just wanted a distraction. The restaurant was beautiful, with soft lighting and quiet music. Lucas was a great conversationalist, charming and funny, and he made her laugh several times. He was the complete opposite of Michael. Michael was steady and quiet, like a deep, still lake. Lucas was bright and intense, like a fire. You seem a little distracted today, Lucas said, casually cutting into his steak. Jessica blinked, then forced a smile. No, just a little tired, I guess. Don't work so hard, he said, his gaze serious. You have to let yourself live a little. You got dark circles under your eyes. His concern, tinged with an easy intimacy, made something stir inside her. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her like that. Michael would just say, get some rest, a flat, perfunctory statement of care. Thanks, she said, looking down and pushing her pasta around with her fork. Don't thank me, he laughed, changing the subject to a funny story about a trip he'd taken. They stayed for a long time. Afterwards, Lucas offered her a ride home, and she accepted. He pulled up in front of her building. Jessica unbuckled her seatbelt. Thank you for dinner. I had a really nice time. The pleasure was all mine, Lucas said. In the dim light of the car, his expression was serious. Jessica, I should get going, she interrupted, pushing the door open. Drive safe. She got out of the car almost in a rush, not looking back as she hurried into the lobby. It wasn't until the elevator doors closed that she finally let out a breath, leaning against the cool metal wall. She had seen where he was going with that look. It was more than just friendly. Her mind was a mess. There was the secret thrill of being pursued, the fear of the unknown, and a sharp, stabbing pang of guilt over Michael. She unlocked the door to their apartment. It was pitch black and silent. He wasn't back yet. She flipped on the lights and stepped inside. She checked the living room, the study, the bedroom. Nothing. She went back to his study. The desk was exactly as she'd left it that morning. A real, cold fear began to set in. She pulled out her phone and dialed his number. The automated voice was chilling. The number you have dialed has been turned off. Turn off? Michael's phone was never off. It was a lifeline for his work. A terrible premonition gripped her. Forcing herself to stay calm, she dialed the number for his assistant, David. He picked up after a few rings. Hello, Jessica. David sounded surprised to hear from her. David, hi. Sorry to bother you so late. Is Michael still at the office? His phone is off, and I can't reach him. She tried to keep her voice even. There was a 2-second pause on the other end. Then David's voice came back, hesitant. Michael, he didn't come in today. Jessica, you didn't know? He had me cancel his entire schedule for the next 2 weeks. He did it yesterday afternoon. Canceled his schedule. Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. Why? He didn't say. Just told me to clear his calendar. David sounded confused. I just assumed. I thought you two had a trip planned or something. A trip? Her heart sank like a stone. What trip? Yesterday was their anniversary, and she'd gone to a work party while he stayed home and smoked in the dark. Okay, I understand. Thanks, David. Jessica hung up, a tremor running through her body. Michael had canceled all his work, turned off his phone, and disappeared. Where did he go? Why hadn't he told her? She collapsed onto the sofa, her mind reeling. Was it a work trip? But he would have told her, and David wouldn't have been in the dark. She suddenly remembered his unnerving silence the night before, the ashtray full of cigarette butts. Could it be? A thought surfaced, unbidden and terrifying. Did he know? Did he know about Lucas? That was impossible. Nothing had happened between them. They were just colleagues who got along well. How could Michael have known? And even if he suspected something, was this his style? To just vanish without a word? She started tearing through his things, searching his study drawers, his closet, desperate for a clue. His passport was gone. So was his ID and a few of his go-to outfits. One of their suitcases was missing from the top of the closet. He had really left, and not for work. Jessica sank to the floor, staring at the empty space where his clothes used to hang. An overwhelming sense of panic and confusion washed over her. Michael was gone. No would-be, no explanation. Just gone. She remembered waking up briefly the morning before. She thought he'd put something on the nightstand before he left. At the time, she'd been too groggy to care. She scrambled back into the bedroom and felt around on the nightstand. Her fingers brushed against a small, hard box. It was a dark blue velvet jewelry box. Her heart hammered against her ribs as her trembling fingers lifted the lid. Inside wasn't a necklace or a ring for her. It was a simple platinum wedding band, the one Michael wore every day. Beneath it lay a folded piece of paper. Jessica unfolded it. Michael's familiar, strong handwriting covered the small square. There were only 3 words. I'm gone. No greeting, no signature, no date. Just those 3 cold, final words. Jessica stared at the note and the abandoned ring, and the blood in her veins turned to ice. He was gone, and it wasn't an impulse. It was planned. He'd cleared his schedule, packed a bag, and left before she ever got home. He'd left his wedding ring. So that's what he was doing last night, sitting in the dark, smoking. He was making his final decision. So that's why he'd asked if she'd eaten. It was their last normal conversation. And what had she been doing? Feeling flustered and excited over another man's flirtatious comment. A wave of vertigo and terror crashed over her. She finally understood. Something essential, something she had taken completely for granted, had just shattered into a million pieces. The first week of Michael's absence passed in a nightmarish haze. Jessica called everyone she could think of who might know where he was, his parents in Ohio, distant cousins he barely spoke to. They all said they hadn't heard from him, and in turn, asked if she and Michael had been fighting. His mother's voice was tight with worry over the phone. Jess, honey, is everything all right? You know Michael, he keeps things bottled up. You have to be patient with him. Jessica could only manage a vague, non-committal reply. She even filed a missing persons report. The police took down the information, but explained that for an adult who leaves of his own volition, without any sign of foul play, there wasn't much they could do besides keep an eye out. It was as if Michael had simply evaporated. At the office, David was running interference, telling everyone that Michael was on an extended medical leave. But it was only a matter of time before rumors started to fly. Jessica forced herself to go to work every day, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop wondering where he was, why he'd left, and if it was truly because of her. Lucas seemed to notice her state. You okay? He asked, stopping by her desk. You seem off. Jessica looked into his concerned eyes, and the explanation died on her lips. What could she possibly say? My husband left me, and I think it's because he thought something was going on between us. She just shook her head. I'm fine. Just tired. He didn't push, only said, if you need anything, I'm here. His kindness felt like a lead weight. Going home to the empty apartment was the worst part. The silence was suffocating. The entire place was saturated with his presence. The mug he used for tea, the book left open on his nightstand, the old shirts still hanging in the back of his closet. Every object was a painful reminder that he was gone. She began to replay the last few weeks in her mind, searching for clues. He had been getting quieter, smoking more. One night she'd woken up and he wasn't in bed. She found him in his study, staring at a piece of paper. When she asked what it was, he just said it was a contract for work. Now she wondered if it was a contract at all. She remembered the time she and Lucas had worked late on a project. He'd given her a ride home, and they'd run into Michael in the lobby, just getting back from a business dinner. Michael hadn't said much, just a curt nod to Lucas before heading to the elevator. At the time, she thought nothing of it, but now she remembered the look in his eyes, colder than usual, harder. Another time, Lucas had called while she was in the shower. Michael answered. When she came out, he handed her the phone and said, "It's your colleague," in a perfectly normal voice. But looking back, she remembered Lucas's tone on that call had been a little too familiar, a little too warm. All these little details, so easily dismissed at the time, now felt like a series of flashing red lights she'd completely ignored. Had he known all along? Had he sensed the shift between her and Lucas? Was he waiting for her to say something, to pull back on her own? And she, oblivious, had walked right into a dinner invitation with the man the night he disappeared. A tidal wave of regret washed over her. She picked up the platinum ring he'd left behind. The cool, heavy metal sent a chill through her. He left his ring. Did that mean he wanted a divorce? The thought was a physical blow. She had always believed their marriage had just settled into a comfortable, if boring, routine, like most long-term couples. It had never, ever occurred to her that it could end, that Michael could leave. She had thought of their home, their marriage, as a fortress. No matter what happened outside, it would always be there to come back to. Now she saw that the fortress was just an empty shell. Its keeper had abandoned his post. On the 7th night, while sifting through Michael's desk for the 100th time, she found a small, locked drawer she'd never noticed before. She tried his birthday, her birthday, their anniversary. Nothing. Then, on a whim, she punched in the date from the day he left. With a soft click, the lock sprang open. Her heart began to pound. She slowly pulled the drawer out. There wasn't much inside. On top was a thick medical file. She opened it, her hands shaking. When her eyes fell on the diagnosis, the air left her lungs. Stomach cancer. Stage 4. The date on the report was from a month ago. Underneath the file were printouts for a one-way flight to San Diego for the day he disappeared, and a signed, notarized divorce agreement. In the section for division of assets, Michael had left her almost everything, including the condo they lived in. It was dated last week. At the very bottom of the drawer was a faded photograph. It was of the two of them, taken right after they graduated from college, standing in front of the campus gates. In the photo, Michael's arm was around her shoulders, his smile easy and bright. She was leaning into him, her own smile radiating pure, uncomplicated happiness. She turned the photo over. On the back, in his familiar script, were 4 words. For Jess, my constant star. Jessica held the photograph, staring at the cold, clinical words on the diagnosis, then at the generous, heartbreaking terms of the divorce, and all the strength went out of her. She slid down the side of the desk and crumpled onto the floor. The tears came then, a violent, silent storm she couldn't control. So that was it. It wasn't her stupid, pathetic little flirtation. He had known. He had known he was dying, and he had known she was drifting away. So he smoked in the dark. So he watched her with those sad, complicated eyes. And he chose the quietest, cleanest way to leave. He put all his affairs in order, left her with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life, and then walked away to face the end alone. He had even, in the cruelest way possible, given her the power. All she had to do was sign the papers, and she would be free, wealthy, and absolved. He had thought of everything except himself. Jessica curled into a ball on the cold floor, clutching the old photograph so tightly her nails dug into her palms. The grief and guilt were a physical force, threatening to tear her apart. She remembered how thin he'd gotten recently, how he'd sometimes press a hand to his stomach his waning appetite. How could she have been so blind? How could she have just assumed it was stress? She had been so wrapped up in her own petty career dramas and emotional whims that she had completely missed the fact that the person closest to her in the world was in agony. Michael! Michael! She screamed his name in her head, but there was only silence. Where was he now? In San Diego? Alone? Sick? How was he managing? Jessica scrambled to her feet, wiping the tears from her face with the back of her hand. She couldn't give up. She had to find him. She grabbed her phone and booked the first flight to San Diego. Then, she started calling every hospital in the city, asking if a patient named Michael Thompson had recently been admitted. She didn't know if she would find him, but she had to try. The air in San Diego was thick with the salty tang of the ocean. Michael rented a small, one-bedroom apartment in an older building not far from the coast. It was sparsely furnished, but it had a small balcony with a sliver of an ocean view. He chose it because it was quiet and because it was only a short drive from the city's best cancer center. Before he checked himself in, he wanted a few days to himself. A few days to get used to the anonymity, to gather his thoughts. Leaving had been easier than he'd expected. Once the decision was made, the logistics were simple. But there was a hollow space in his chest that the ocean breeze couldn't fill. He tried not to think about Jessica. Had she noticed he was gone yet? Was she frantic or was she relieved? He couldn't let his mind go there. Seeing that text from Lucas pop up on her phone in the study that day, it felt like the world had gone gray. He'd seen the signs before, of course, but he hadn't wanted to believe them. He thought what they had was strong enough to withstand anything. But maybe the foundation had been crumbling for years, and he'd just refused to look down. Then came the doctor's report. It was a 1-2 punch from which he knew he would never recover. He hadn't told her about the cancer. He couldn't stand the thought of seeing pity in her eyes. That would be worse than the disease itself. And if he was being honest, it was a test. A cruel, selfish test. If he was going to die anyway, why not give her an easy way out? If her heart was already somewhere else, he would only be an anchor weighing her down. The moment he left his ring on the nightstand, it felt like he was cutting off a part of himself. It hurt, but there was a strange, dark freedom in it, too. Here, in this empty apartment, he didn't have to pretend. He could let the pain show on his face. He could stare at the ceiling all night. He could curl up on the sofa when the spasms in his stomach became unbearable, sweat beading on his forehead. The loneliness was absolute, but in it, he found a strange kind of peace. Sometimes he would stand on the balcony and watch the ocean. The water glittered under the California sun, vast and endless. In the face of such immensity, life and death seemed less important. He took out his phone and turned it on. A flood of notifications poured in. Missed calls and texts, mostly from Jessica, but also from David and his parents. He skimmed Jessica's messages. They progressed from simple questions. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? To frantic pleas. Michael, where are you? I'm so worried. And then, the last one, a voice message, her voice choked with tears. Michael, I saw the doctor's report. Please just call me. Please. His finger hovered over her name. Then, his face a mask of stone, he turned the phone off, snapped the SIM card in half, and dropped the pieces in the trash. There was no point. He had chosen this path. He couldn't turn back now. He couldn't give her a reason to hesitate. He had an appointment at the hospital the next day to begin treatment. He knew it would be a long, painful road with a predetermined end. He just wanted to make the time he had left as bearable as possible. He went downstairs to a small market to buy some essentials. There was a fruit stand near the entrance, run by a friendly woman with a loud voice. Hey there, you new to the building? Don't recognize you. You should buy some oranges, they're extra sweet today. Michael stopped. Jessica loved oranges, but hated peeling them. He used to do it for her, handing her the neat segments. 2 pounds, please, he said. You got it, she said, weighing them out. You live here alone? He mumbled a non-committal reply. Well, you take care of yourself, you hear? You look a little pale. Make sure you're eating right, she chattered, handing him the bag. He thanked her and walked away. The casual, anonymous kindness of a stranger was a small comfort, quickly swallowed by the vastness of his isolation. Back in the apartment, he set the bag of oranges on the table, but didn't eat one. He just sat, watching the sky darken outside his window. The pain started again. He shook a few pills into his hand and swallowed them with water. The side effects made him dizzy and nauseous. He remembered the first time he'd had a stomachache like this. It was in college, after he'd pulled 3 all-nighters to finish a project. Jessica had panicked, running to the campus clinic for medicine, then waiting outside his dorm until he'd finished the hot soup she'd brought him. Her eyes had been so clear then, so full of him. What had time done to them? Or had it just revealed who they really were all along? He closed his eyes and leaned his head back, letting the memories and the pain wash over him. He had no way of knowing that, on the other side of the city, Jessica was dragging her suitcase out of the airport. The flight information gave her a starting point, but finding one person who wanted to be hidden in a city of millions was like looking for a needle in a haystack. She checked into a cheap motel and started her search. She went from real estate office to real estate office, showing his picture, asking if anyone had rented an apartment to him. She walked the halls of the oncology wards of every hospital in the area, hoping for a miracle. She couldn't bear to think of what he was going through. Stage 4 cancer. How much pain was he in? And who was taking care of him? The thought drove her to the brink of madness. For the first time, with painful, terrifying clarity, she knew she couldn't lose him. Whatever problems they had, whatever stupid, meaningless flirtation she'd entertained, none of it mattered. She had to find him. She had to tell him she was sorry. She had to tell him she'd been a fool. She had to tell him that the only person she had ever truly loved was him. The city glittered under the night sky. Two people who had once been the closest in the world were now in the same city, under the same stars, separated by an impossible distance, each bearing their own private agony. Michael checked into the hospital. The tests confirmed his diagnosis. It was worse than they'd thought. The cancer had spread. The doctor laid out a chemotherapy regimen, his expression grim. He told Michael to be prepared. The chemo was brutal. Violent nausea, a complete loss of appetite, his hair falling out in clumps. He grew thinner by the day, his eyes sinking into dark sockets, his skin the color of ash. He refused a full-time caregiver, hiring someone for only a couple of hours a day to clean his room and prepare some broth. Most of the time, he was alone, watching the poison drip into his veins or staring at the blank patch of sky outside his window. The patients in the beds around him came and went. Some were cheerful, others despondent. Michael barely spoke to any of them. He had sealed himself in a glass box, shutting out the world. Sometimes he would take out the old, faded photograph of him and Jessica. The brighter their smiles in the picture, the bleaker his reality felt. His oncologist was Dr. Evans, a kind, middle-aged man who always tried to make conversation during his rounds. "Mr. Thompson, have you notified your family?" he asked one day, looking at his chart. Michael stared out the window. "They don't know," he said flatly. Dr. Evans sighed. "In your condition, it's really best to have family here. This is too much for one person to bear alone." Michael didn't answer. He had to bear it. This was his choice. In between chemo cycles, on days when he felt strong enough, he would put on a hat and sit in the small garden behind the hospital. It was always full of patients and their families. The sound of children laughing, the low murmur of conversations. It was a portrait of life that only highlighted his own solitude. One afternoon, he saw a young woman pushing her father in a wheelchair. She looked exhausted, but she spoke to him softly, constantly adjusting the blanket on his lap. Michael watched them for a long time. He wondered what Jessica would do if she were here. Would she be impatient with the tedious demands of caregiving? Or would she be like that woman, gentle and steadfast? He didn't know. He realized with a jolt that he didn't really know the woman she had become. They had been together for so long that they had stopped paying attention. One afternoon, he was dozing in his bed when he heard a commotion at the nurse's station down the hall. A woman's voice, sharp with anxiety. "Please, you have to let me see him. I'm looking for Michael Thompson. Is he in this ward?" Michael's heart seized. He knew that voice. Jessica. How in the world did she find him? He instinctively pulled the covers up to his chin and turned to face the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear snippets of the conversation. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Patient privacy. I'm his wife. Look, here's our marriage license. Here's a picture." Her voice was thick with tears. "I've been looking for him for weeks. Please." The nurse sounded sympathetic but firm. "Ma'am, I can't let you in without his permission. Let me go ask him if he's willing to see you." "Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you so much." He heard footsteps approaching his room. Michael squeezed his eyes shut, his knuckles white as he gripped the thin hospital blanket. The nurse leaned over him. "Mr. Thompson, there's a woman here. Jessica Miller? She says she's your wife. Would you like to see her?" Without turning around, his voice came out a raw, cold whisper. "I don't know her. Tell her to leave." The nurse was taken aback. "Sir, she has your marriage license." "I don't know her," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "All right," the nurse said and walked away. He heard her quiet voice at the door. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Miller. Mr. Thompson says he doesn't know you." "What? That's impossible." Jessica's voice was a cry of disbelief. "He said that? That he doesn't know me?" "Yes. I think it's best if you leave." "No, I'm not leaving. He's in there. Michael. Michael, come out. Why are you doing this?" She was screaming now, her voice breaking with despair. Michael lay perfectly still, a stone statue in the bed. Every one of her cries was a knife twisting in his heart. He bit down on his lip, so hard he tasted blood. The commotion lasted for a few more minutes before security guards arrived and gently escorted her away. The hallway fell silent again. Michael slowly opened his eyes. They were dry and burning. He stared at the white ceiling tile above him as a single, hot tear escaped and disappeared into his hairline. He'd done it. He had pushed her away in the cruelest way imaginable. It was better this way. Let her hate him. Let her move on. It was better than letting her see him like this, a withered, dying man, and chaining her to him out of guilt and pity for the rest of her life. He took out the worn photograph, his thumb stroking the image of Jessica's young, smiling face. Jess, I'm sorry. And goodbye. Jessica was escorted out of the hospital by security. She stood on the curb, the hot sun beating down, but she was shivering. He doesn't know you. Michael's words, delivered by a stranger, had shattered the last of her hope. It was worse than the divorce papers, worse than the diagnosis. It was a cold, absolute rejection that froze her to the core. How could he, after 5 years of marriage, after everything they'd been through, how could he erase it all with those 3 words? A hot surge of anger and betrayal rose in her, but it was quickly extinguished by a pain so deep it stole her breath. She stumbled back to her motel room and collapsed on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The tears were gone, replaced by a hollow numbness. Should she just give up? Do what he so clearly wanted her to do? Sign the papers, take the money, and disappear from his life? Maybe it would be a relief for both of them. She picked up her phone. The screen lit up with a photo of the two of them, taken a few years ago on vacation. They looked so happy. Was it all a lie? No, she wouldn't accept it. If Michael truly felt nothing for her, why leave her everything? If he hated her, there were 1,000 crueler ways to end things. He wouldn't have just slipped away to suffer alone. He was pushing her away, maybe because he still cared. The thought was a tiny flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. Jessica sat up. She couldn't give up. Not now, when he needed someone the most. She went back to the hospital. This time, she didn't go to his ward. She found Dr. Evans. She explained who she was, showing him her marriage license and their photos. Dr. Evans looked at the exhausted but determined woman in front of him and sighed. Mrs. Thompson, I understand, but your husband has been very clear. He wants to go through this alone. Doctor, please, just tell me how he's doing, she begged. I'm his wife. I have a right to know. Dr. Evans hesitated, then told her everything. He didn't sugarcoat it. The words advanced, spreading. Poor reaction to chemo hit her like physical blows. He's in a lot of pain, isn't he? She whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, Dr. Evans said gently, physically and emotionally. He's withdrawn completely. That's not good for his treatment. Jessica was silent for a moment. Then she looked up, her eyes blazing with a new resolve. Dr. Evans, can I ask you for a favor? Don't tell him I was here, but I need your help. She explained her plan. From that day on, Michael noticed small changes. The bland hospital food was replaced by meals that were surprisingly delicious and easy on his stomach. Sometimes, a container of homemade soup would appear on his tray, the taste. Bagli familiar, a soft, comfortable beanie hat, the exact style he would have chosen for himself, was left on his nightstand. When the pain was bad at night, a nurse would happen to come in and administer another dose of morphine without him having to ask. If he idly mentioned a craving for something, it would mysteriously appear on his lunch tray the next day. He wasn't a fool. He asked the nurses, but they just smiled and said the hospital was upgrading its patient care services. He was too weak to argue. He couldn't deny that in the midst of all the pain and loneliness, these small, anonymous kindnesses were a comfort, a warmth he couldn't explain but couldn't resist. One afternoon, after a particularly bad round of chemo, he was lying in bed, completely drained. He felt a cool, damp cloth gently wiping his forehead and mouth. The touch was impossibly soft, careful. He forced his heavy eyelids open. Through his blurry vision, he thought he saw a familiar, slender figure disappearing out the door. Was he hallucinating? He closed his eyes and gave a weak, cynical smile. It couldn't be her. He'd pushed her away. She was gone. Besides, the figure he'd seen looked thinner than he remembered Jessica being. But a small, traitorous part of his heart fluttered with hope. Michael's condition worsened. A sudden infection sent him into a high fever and delirium. He was rushed to the ICU. Jessica found out from Dr. Evans and ran to the hospital. She stood outside the glass wall of the ICU, watching him lie motionless in the bed, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires. His face was gray, lifeless. Only the beeping machines assured her he was still alive. She felt her own heart stop. She stayed there for days, sleeping on a bench in the hallway, eating whatever she could find from a vending machine. She prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. A few days later, he stabilized and was moved back to a regular room. He was still unconscious. Jessica was finally allowed inside. She sat by his bed, her heart aching as she looked at his face, so thin and gaunt he was almost unrecognizable. Tears streamed down her face as she gently took his hand. It was cold and bruised from the 4 lines. She wrapped both of her hands around it, trying to warm it with her own. "Michael," she whispered, her voice choked. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She didn't know if he could hear her. "I found our picture. The one from college. I saw what you wrote on the back. My constant star. I am sorry, Michael. I forgot. I let our stars go out. I was wrong. I shouldn't have ignored you. I shouldn't have let you go through this alone. And I shouldn't have been so friendly with Lucas. Nothing happened, I swear. I was just lost. Please wake up. Please? We can start over. I swear, I'll never let you go again." She talked for hours, whispering memories, regrets, and desperate promises for a future that was slipping away. Under her touch, Michael's finger twitched. She didn't notice. A few days later, he woke up. The first thing he saw was Jessica, asleep in the chair next to his bed, her head slumped forward, still clutching his hand. She was so much thinner. Her face was pale and drawn, with dark purple shadows under her eyes. So it wasn't a hallucination. All those small comforts, the familiar taste of the soup, the fleeting glimpses of her, it had been her all along. She had never left. He watched her sleep, a war of emotions raging inside him. He was angry that she had disobeyed him, frustrated that she was tying herself to a dying man. But underneath it all was a deep, profound ache of love and gratitude he couldn't deny. He had missed this. He had missed her. Jessica's eyes fluttered open, and she found him staring at her. A look of sheer joy washed over her face. "Michael, you're awake. How do you feel? Are you in pain? I'll get the doctor." She started to get up, but he squeezed her hand. His grip was weak, but it was enough to stop her. "What? Didn't you go?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Tears welled in her eyes again. She squeezed his hand back. "I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. So don't even think about trying to get rid of me again." He closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. When he opened them again, his gaze was full of a deep, weary sadness. "I look terrible." "Don't be stupid," she said, managing a watery smile. "You're the most handsome man I've ever seen. You're a warrior. You're fighting." He didn't say anything else, but he didn't let go of her hand. He had let her back in. From that day on, Jessica became his official caregiver. She quit her job and rented a small apartment near the hospital. Her life became a simple, grueling routine of cooking, cleaning, and caring for him. She learned to make nutritious meals he could tolerate. She massaged his stiff muscles. She read to him, told him stories, or just sat with him in silence. Michael was still quiet, but the wall of ice around him had begun to melt. He ate her food. He let her help him walk a few steps down the hall. He would even manage a faint smile when she told a particularly bad joke. They never spoke of the past, of Lucas, of the divorce papers. It was as if a silent truce had been called. But Jessica knew things were different. There was a new intensity in his gaze when he looked at her, a mixture of wonder and sorrow. One night, after she had given him his medicine, he spoke. "The papers. Did you sign them?" Jessica froze. "No," she said, her voice soft. "I ripped them up." He was silent for a long time. "That was for you. To protect you." "I don't need that kind of protection," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I just need you." He looked away, out the window. "I can't give you anything. You being alive is everything," she whispered, leaning over and gently hugging him, burying her face in the hollow of his shoulder. "Michael, let's start over. I don't care if we have a day, a month, or a year. Let's just start over." His body was rigid for a moment. Then, slowly, he lifted his free hand and rested it on her back. That small gesture was all it took. The tears she had been holding back streamed down her face. She had finally broken through. With Jessica by his side, Michael's condition stabilized. The latest scans showed that the cancer had stopped spreading. It wasn't a cure, but it was a miracle. Dr. Evans said that her presence, her love, was a powerful medicine. Michael's spirit rallied. He had more energy, a little color returned to his face. He could even sit in a wheelchair in the garden, for an hour at a time. Their conversations were still quiet, but they were no longer strained. One evening at sunset, Jessica was pushing his wheelchair through the garden. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Okay," he said, his eyes on the orange and pink clouds. "A little stronger than yesterday." "Good. I found a recipe for a new fish soup. I'll make it for you tomorrow." "Okay," he said. After a moment, he added, "Thank you, Jess, for all this." She stopped and crouched in front of him, looking into his eyes. "Don't thank me. Being here with you. This is a gift." He looked at her, his expression softening. He reached out a trembling hand and brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead. She caught his hand and pressed it to her cheek. "We haven't had a moment like this in a long time," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "No," he agreed. "Let's have more of them." He looked away at the setting sun, and when he looked back at her, his eyes were clear and serious. "Jessica, yes. If, and it's a big if, but if I get better," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Let's have a baby." Jessica stared at him, stunned. Then, a wave of joy so intense, it was painful crashed over her. It was more than a proposal. It was a promise of a future. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, a little boy who looks just like you." For the first time in months, a real, genuine smile spread across Michael's face. He reached out his other hand and clumsily wiped her tears away. "Don't cry. I'm happy," she sobbed, laughing through her tears. The setting sun cast their two shadows as one long silhouette on the path, inseparable. But the reprieve was short-lived. The next round of chemo hit him harder than ever, wiping out all the progress he had made. Watching him suffer, Jessica felt helpless. One night, as he lay awake, his body rigid with pain, she held his hand and talked to him, trying to distract him. "When you're feeling better, we'll go on a trip. Just somewhere close. To the ocean. We can rent a little cottage and just watch the waves." He suddenly interrupted her, his voice weak. "Jessica, what is it? Is the pain worse?" "No," he said, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. Can you really forget the past?" Her heart sank, the unspoken thing that had been hovering between them. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Michael, there was nothing between me and Lucas. I was foolish. I was bored, and I took you for granted. But my heart never left you. It wasn't until I found your ring, until I saw that diagnosis, that I realized what a fool I had been. That silly crush meant nothing. You are everything." He just looked at her, his gaze seeming to pierce right through her. Finally, he spoke, his voice full of a weary sadness. "I know." She stared at him. "You know? I know you," he whispered. "If you had really cheated, you would have been different. More guilty, more distant. You were just lost." "Then why?" she choked out. "Why did you leave?" He looked away. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of watching you stay with me out of pity. Scared of becoming a burden. Scared that one day I would see you look at me." With disgust, his voice was raw, vulnerable. "I wanted you to remember me as I was." "You idiot," she sobbed, leaning over and hugging him. "You big, stupid idiot. I can never feel that way. I love you, not out of pity, because I love you. The strong, proud Michael, and the scared, vulnerable Michael. All of it." His body trembled in her arms. He closed his eyes and held her, his arms wrapping around her with all the strength he had left. The last wall between them had finally crumbled. After that, they were closer than ever. He fought harder in his treatments. She devoted every second to his comfort. But the disease was relentless. After a serious complication, he was confined to his bed, barely conscious most of the time. He knew the end was near. One sunny afternoon, he was lucid. He asked her to bring him a small notebook from his bedside table. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," he whispered. Inside, in his weakening handwriting, was a list of all their bank accounts, passwords, and investments. A detailed instruction manual for the life she would have to live without him. Her hands trembled, and a tear splashed onto the page, smearing the ink. "Why would you do this?" she cried. He took her hand. "Don't cry. Someone has to. Take care of you. I worry. I don't want this," she sobbed, clutching the notebook to her chest. "I just want you." "Jessica, listen to me," he said, his voice gentle. "These last few months, they've been a gift. I was wrong to push you away. Being with you, having you take care of me, it's made me happy." He smiled faintly. "When the time comes, don't be too sad. Scatter my ashes in the ocean. I'd like that. Stop it. Please, stop talking like that, she pleaded, burying her face in his chest. He stroked her hair. Live a good life, Jessica. Live for both of us. And if you meet someone else. There is no one else, she said, lifting her head, her tear-streaked face fierce. Do you hear me, Michael? It's only ever been you. And it will only ever be you. You're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll find you in the next life and the one after that. He looked at her, his eyes full of love and sorrow. Okay, he whispered, a tear sliding from the corner of his eye. It's a deal. A few days later, on a quiet, sun-drenched morning, Michael died peacefully in her arms. His face was calm, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. Jessica didn't scream or cry. She just held him, her face pressed against his, as his body grew cold. She scattered his ashes in the Pacific Ocean, just as he had asked. The wind caught them and carried them out over the waves, and he was gone. She stood on the rocky cliff, the sea breeze on her face. She felt a profound sadness, but also a strange sense of peace. She placed a hand on her stomach. A new life was growing inside her, a gift from their last good days together. See, she whispered to the ocean. I told you you were stuck with me. The waves crashed against the shore, as if in reply. 3 years later, a little boy with his father's dark, curly hair and serious eyes ran laughing across a sandy beach, a bright pinwheel spinning in his hand. Jessica watched him, a gentle smile on her face. Leo, slow down. You'll fall. He just giggled and ran faster. She sat on a blanket, watching her son, then looked out at the endless blue of the ocean. The last 3 years had been hard, but every time she looked at Leo, she saw Michael, and she found the strength to go on. She had taken over the parts of his company he had left to her. With David's help, she had learned the ropes. She didn't try to grow the business, just kept it stable. It was more than enough. Life was quiet, but it was full. She never dated. Lucas had sent a few polite emails over the years, which she had answered with equal politeness. Her heart was full. There was no room for anyone else. Leo, tired from his running, collapsed in her lap. Mama, the water is so big. Yes, it is, she said, hugging him tight. And Daddy is out there, watching over us. Leo looked at her with his big, curious eyes. Daddy. Yes, Daddy, she said, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. He loves you and Mama more than anything in the world. Leo snuggled against her, and she held him, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. She remembered Michael's last words to her. Live a good life, Jessica. Live for both of us. She had not let grief destroy her. She was raising their son. She was carrying on his legacy. She was living every day with his love in her heart. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. Their love hadn't died. It had simply changed form. It was in the sea breeze, in the warm sun, in the sound of her son's laughter. Mama, let's go home, Leo mumbled into her shoulder. Okay, baby, let's go home. She stood up, lifting him into her arms. She took one last look at the vast blue ocean. Then she turned and began the steady walk home. End.